I thought I'd clarify my position on 90% silver today, as well as bring you a market update. What we're doing right now today is January the 19th of 2026. It's a Monday. Most of the markets are closed, but the futures market is open right now, and therefore the Kitco spot market is also open. And so we've seen some pretty good activity on the overnight market and throughout the day today. And I thought I'd bring you up to date on that. As far as silver goes, silver opened up at $90.04, had just a little bit of a dip to $89.83, and then it kind of broke out of this little range that we've had this past week. Now, whether or not you can say that it's actually in a breakout from this range or not, we'll have to wait a day or two. This is the first time we don't have a closing yet. It's a little before noon on Monday, and so it'll be a while before it closes, and then again it'll be a while before the entire market opens up tomorrow. And so we'll wait and see before we call this a breakout, but right now it's looking pretty good. It's been as high as $94.80, and just before I started videoing today, it was at $94.42, which would certainly be an all-time daily closing high, because $94.80 is an all-time record high on the U.S. markets for silver. So great start to the week. Again, we do look like we might be breaking out of this range. Don't know yet. In order to really say that you've broken out one way or the other, you need to do so with conviction. And by that I mean you need to be a dollar or two over. It needs to be on good volume, and it needs to last more than just a day. But we're looking good right now. The volume today, even though it's a holiday for many people, has been about 137 million ounces on the front COMEX contract, the March contract. And so fairly active for a holiday. I think that's a little over 74,000 contracts that have traded so far today. So far we're looking pretty good. So just keep that in mind, keep that on your radar screen, and kind of keep this little line in mind for if we're going to be breaking out to the next leg of the bull market, because that might help you decide in your own mind whether or not we're continuing on in that. And so I thought I would show you that. I also thought I would kind of clarify some things that we talked about just a day ago or 2 days ago on the 90% silver market. I sold part of my 90% silver holdings last week, a little bit on Monday, and then quite a bit more on Friday. It was still about a little less than 10% of my total 90% holdings, but it seemed to bother a lot of people, and so I thought I would let you know why I did that, and also maybe some strategies that you can use for your own plans whenever you're buying and selling silver. Now, let me start off by saying this. I realize that many in the stacking community, the only purpose they have is to just get more. They're looking at some unknown event in the future. They've got an idea as to some of the specifics of that unknown event. They feel like there's going to be an economic collapse. They feel like the fiat dollar may finally go the way that all other fiat money has gone throughout the history of fiat currency, and they see that looming immediately on the horizon or maybe a distance, but they want to be prepared, and they don't have enough yet in their own mind, and so they're still stacking. And for people who are doing that, for people who are looking at silver as an insurance policy or a savings account, and you don't have a use for it right now, then by all means don't be taking profit if you haven't accumulated what you want to accumulate in the first place as far as your own particular plan. If you're saving for something big, maybe you're going to put a down payment on a house, maybe you're going to buy a piece of land, maybe you're going to pay off all of your debt, and you haven't gotten to that point yet. And so for you, again, you're saving for a specific reason in this instance. It wouldn't make any sense for you to be taking profit on that, because it could endanger your future plans for what you're saving for in the first place. And so in those two categories, whether we're talking about long-term savings or whether we're talking about insurance, clearly, if you're stacking for that, you don't let go of it yet until you have a need to let go of it. The third category that we've been looking at are the investors. And many of us who are in the investing category, I'm certainly within that, also have most of their holdings in the insurance or the savings category, a category you don't touch unless you just absolutely have to. But in my situation, I started in silver. I guess the first physical silver I actually bought was a little APMAX bar in 1982, just a 1 ounce bar. I think it cost me a little over $12. And so that started my physical stacking at that time. I've been doing it for a long time. I bought a monster box of Eagles, I think somewhere around 93 or 94 for a little over $3,000, if you can believe those prices were in existence. Also bought, I think, about 5 ounces of gold at the same time for about $250, $300 an ounce. It may have been a little bit more than that on the gold at that time. But then when I switched careers, I went from a real estate appraiser to being a preacher in a small town. Well, we had to divest ourselves of most of our physical holdings during that time. I started in 1985, little bitty congregation, but really an enjoyable town, an enjoyable community, perfect place to raise kids. And so we thought, my wife and I thought that would be much better for us than the bigger town that we lived in up in Wyoming. Obviously, no town in Wyoming's real big, but Casper was a bigger town. It was an oil community, and we had an opportunity to come to a small town in Texas and preach, and so that's what we did. Switched careers, switched location, and came here, and so I had to sell some of our silver, if not nearly all of our silver and all of our gold at that time, just to make ends meet during that time. We have 3 children, and they were 6th grade and below at that time. We were able to, through the years, put every one of them through a private college and make sure that we paid for that so they didn't have a lot of student debt or any student debt when they ended up with their college. And so we've been able to do a number of different things. In 2002, I started buying silver again as far as accumulating it. And once I started doing that, I had an ongoing business in it where I would buy off of eBay and then I would go down and sell it to our local coin store in Amarillo, Texas. And I did that, again, in order to make a little bit of extra income in order to make ends meet. It was just a part-time business that I had, and it helped to make those ends meet. And during that time, we started accumulating a little bit at a time. We would sell what we needed to sell, take the profit that we needed to take, but continue to accumulate. And it worked out so well that we've been able to do a number of different things through the years, including buying a couple of houses, not fancy houses by any stretch, but bought and paid for houses, and an accumulation of silver that permitted us to retire several years early. And that was on a preacher's salary that started off when we first came here at $285 a week. And so this gives you a little bit of an idea of my background and some of the motivations that I have and some of the reasons that I got into silver on a little bit bigger basis as we started going through time. As a preacher, I know full well that this life isn't all that we're here for. And so silver has never been my God. It's never been my idol. I just use it as a tool and part of my responsibility to serve God. A lot of people don't agree with that. I understand it. You think it's religious fanaticism if you believe in God and if you have any feelings towards anything other than money. I get that. I'm not that way. That's not what motivates me. And so when we talk about silver, and when we talk about last week when I started taking some profit in silver, you have to understand that my motivation in life is not just to get a bigger and bigger and bigger pile of silver just to have it. I want to use it as a resource, as one of the resources that God's entrusted me with. And part of that is to be able to have a plan. And part of our plan was to be able to retire a little bit early so that we could do certain things in our service that we wanted to do. And so part of what we have in our silver accumulation is a plan to sell a certain amount of it each month in order to help make ends meet. Our Social Security is a very low amount. There's no retirement for preachers, at least not from small congregations like the one I was from. So we had to take matters into our own hands. So if you wonder why I sold part of my 90% silver, part of it was just my regular scheduled selling. But in this instance, there was also a motivation as far as the silver market's gone up very nicely in the last year. Do I think it's going to continue to go up? I absolutely do. But I've also found through the years that the market has surprised me. There's been a lot of times when I thought the market was going to go up that it didn't go up, it went down. There's been other times where I thought the market would go down and it didn't go down, it went up. We all have certain ideas as to what the market should do, and the motivation that we have for that can be anything from greed to necessity. But when we have these ideas, sometimes we get married to these ideas. We believe because there is a certain set of facts in front of us that means that silver has to go in a certain situation. But that's not always the case. And so for some of us, especially those of us who are investors, when we see certain opportunities to take a little profit off of the table, past experience has proven that that's been prudent. Is this time different? I think most of us believe that it is different this time. There are things in the market that have already happened in the silver market that have just flat out never happened before. There are certain drivers within this market that are just absolutely enormous. Not only has there been a mining shortage for the past 5 years or so, as far as the difference between what's being mined and what's needed in industry and for investment, but there are more and more uses for silver that's creating an even heavier demand right now. Will that continue? Well, a lot of it depends on if we have a big recession or worldwide depression that so many people are anticipating. In such a case, that's going to bring the industrial demand, the commercial demand, way down. There are monetary factors with silver and gold that most of us are aware of, and so a lot of us expect that these metals will continue to do well. But understand that in every recession and depression in history, that the metals go down at first just like the rest of the market does. And part of it is because that's often where people have stored their money, and that's what's going to be able to rescue them from certain economic realities. And part of it is just the normal panic that you see in any market. But over time, we see that the precious metals seem to hold their value, and sometimes they well outperform the market. And so I just wanted to point that out. For those of you who are looking for economic collapse, understand that this is not always a favorable thing for silver and gold, and it may not prove to be so the next time it happens. Time will tell. But as far as 90% silver, there are some factors within 90% silver that I believe are incredibly bullish. The first is this: the price is just too low. The margin that the big boys are buying and selling it for are sometimes extreme. I looked at one large online dealer that had a 25.5% spread between what they're willing to buy 90% for and sell 90% for. As a result, I believe they're nearly out of 90% who in their right mind would sell to them if they can get a much better price from somewhere else. And so we see circumstances like that. I do believe that 90% as a sector within the precious metal sector of silver is undervalued right now. It's selling quite a bit below the spot price as opposed to, say, American Eagles or even 999 fine silver, though that gap between 90% and 999 may be filling pretty quick with some of the decisions by some of the local refineries or some of the nationwide refineries at that. So the first is it just seems to be undervalued in relationship to the rest of the silver market. And typically when something has had historically a high demand, typically those anomalies will work themselves out. And so even in a very high market, you do have something that's at a bargain price, and I believe more and more people will go to that. The second is the melt, and we've talked about that a number of times. As far back as 1980, after the first great melt of the constitutional silver, 90% quarters, dimes, and half dollars. The silver dollars had certainly already been melted, or many of them, but by 1980, during the great melt, it was estimated that there might be somewhere around just a fourth of the total 90% silver ever produced still remaining that had not been destroyed through melt. Now that seems a little bit low to me, but I've seen a lot of evidence through the years that might support that. Now since 1980, we had a little melting going on in 2011, not much. The refineries never got backed up in 2011 like they did in 1979, 1980, or in our modern times today. And so if there was melting occurring between 1980 and 2025, I suspect it was more of a minimal amount and probably not a lot of 90%. But now we've got a melting going on in 90% again, and that's again reducing the overall population of pre-65 constitutional silver. And so we're starting to create even more of a scarcity of this particular form of silver. And so that's the second part, is it's getting rare, and you cannot reproduce 90% silver, at least not in the form of the pre-65. I know they're producing some modern proof sets, but you just try and see what you can get for those, and I think you're going to find that that's not the same as the pre-65 silver. The next point is this. When we talk about 90% silver, there is a numismatic factor, there is a rarity factor, there is a condition factor that always plays into it. When I sold my silver last week, my 90%, a small portion, less than 10% of it, since that time I've already repurchased some of a much higher quality and of a greater rarity. I bought a little set of 16 Franklin half dollars, I think for $460. They were all either uncirculated, proof, or almost uncirculated. And it was just a date set going from 1948 to 1963. A very high quality set, a good trade compared to what I sold off last week. And then just in the last day or two, I bought another set of half dollars. One of them was a seated half dollar in fairly decent condition. Others were proof or uncirculated Franklin half dollars, and then some very nice lower mintage and older Walking Liberty half dollars. And so I was able to upgrade the 90% that I traded for already. And so this is one of the reasons that some of us will go ahead and sell some of our 90%. We're taking the worst of the worst and we're exchanging it for something that actually has a numismatic value to it. And maybe this is a good point as well to discuss what a numismatic value is. When we talk about collectibles, there's a lot of garbage coming from the United States Mint right now. I don't mean that it's not high quality. What I mean is that it is overpriced, that it is overproduced, there's not a rarity factor, the quality is going to be mint state or proof 69 or 70 when it comes out of the mint. And so all these modern coins, while they may be collectible to you and you may enjoy getting them from the mint in the year they're issued, you're going to have a long time before you'll ever have appreciation for the collectible portion that you have spent on that. Several of y'all have mentioned that I believe the proof eagles right now are selling for between $159 and $173, depending on which one you're looking at. Well, that's so far above what spot's at, and it's so far above what they're selling their normal eagles right now that it will take you forever to recoup that from a numismatic point of view. And so while silver could go up to that point, you could probably put your money in a lot better vehicle right now. 90%, I believe, is that very vehicle. And so even though I've sold part of it, it has freed up money to buy superior 90% with numismatic. And then the final reason that I wanted to talk about as far as the 90% silver is it has a divisibility to it that is unmatched in the industry. You're looking at 0.07 ounces of silver for a dime. You're looking at 0.18 ounces of silver for a quarter. You're looking at 0.36 ounces of silver for a $0.50. They're divisible. And so if you ever do get to a point where you need to use that silver for barter, it's much easier than bringing in a 10-ounce bar or a 100-ounce bar, or sometimes even a 1-ounce coin. And so the divisibility of it makes it highly desirable. And so as far as 90% silver, not only am I a big fan, but about half of my total silver holdings are in that. I just use that from time to time to take advantage of opportunities that appear at a current moment. Was that a good decision? Well, only time will tell, but so far it's been a good decision for what I've been able to repurchase because I've gotten much nicer coins from it. Will I be able to reproduce the rest of what I sold at the same price or lower? Who knows? But I'm going to try, and I've been doing this for a number of years. So I wanted to set that record straight. 90% silver is a fantastic vehicle. In my opinion, it is probably one of the best forms to invest in when we're investing in silver. I like 999. I like US Eagles as well. I really like Morgan silver dollars also. But half of my silver holdings are in 90% and will probably continue to be so for the very reasons that I've mentioned today. Well, that's the video for today. Let me know what you think. Some of y'all were very frank in the last video. I think I had comments of everything from stupid to idiot. I think one person said moron. I'm not sure if they spelled it correctly, but I got the point of it all. And so let me know what you think about this in the comments. Also, in the comments, we've had some tremendous observations on the current market. So if you have anything you'd like to share in the comments, please do that. I always appreciate that. I can't always get back to it in a timely fashion, but I try and get back when you have made a comment. So again, I appreciate that. Certainly appreciate your watching. And for those of you who have subscribed, thank you for that as well. But hopefully this will give you a place to start on this Monday, January the 19th of 2026. Thanks for watching. God bless.